What's up, everybody? Welcome to Make Things Tiny. My name is Mick, and today is all about tiny house education. I'm talking to Zach Francis. Zach is the co-founder of tinyhouse.com, which is a wonderful website with great resources where you can learn from experts. So we'll talk more about that in the video. You might have also seen Zach on the hgtv series Tiny Luxury that ran for a few years. That was based off of their company Tiny Heirloom, based out of Portland, Oregon. Just like a premier, high-quality luxury custom-build tiny house company. So yeah, I'm super excited for you guys to learn from Zach. Before jumping into this conversation with Zach, I just want to take a moment to thank the sponsor for this video. Today's video is sponsored by Mac Insurance Inc. Mac Insurance is the only tiny house insurance company in the United States. They create a comprehensive policy based specifically on your tiny house and to meet your needs. So whether you're doing a primary dwelling, secondary, short-term and long-term rental, they've got you covered. So please do check out their website in the video description here. Check out their Instagram, reach out to them, and make sure you get insured. And then last but not least, if you want to check out the Make Things Tiny merch shop, we've got some really cool designs, and just always thinking of different ones. So you can come and you can buy this Let's Talk Tiny hoodie, which I'm wearing today. It's super comfortable. It's really lightweight. I'm excited about it. I'm excited to wear it today. So check out the Make Things Tiny merch shop. And then if you're new to the channel, please do take the time to subscribe. It helps me out a ton. Helps me build the community, helps me continue to create videos and good content for you guys around tiny houses. So tap the notification bell so you find out when I drop new videos. I drop new videos every single week. So let's jump into it. Let's talk about tiny houses, education, finance, the whole thing. Let's do it. Zach is the co-founder of tinyhouse.com, which is an awesome website. I love what you guys are doing. If you don't mind just taking a second and just talking a little bit about your background, sort of like what initially got you into tiny houses, and then we can go from there.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me on the podcast today, Nick. It's a pleasure for sure. And like Nick said, I'm Zach and been a part of the tiny house industry for probably, close to 12 years, something like that. What we're doing right now with in the tiny house space is we're really focusing on education and bringing as much education to people as possible. And so we have the platform tinyhouse.com and trying to spread as much credible information as we can inside the space. And a little bit of a background on me. We got started back in actually diving into the tiny house movement in 2014 when we started building custom luxury tiny houses, which is kind of the first luxury side of the tiny house space. Before that, it was mostly, how cheap can you build a tiny home? But we decided let's take the luxury side and really build something high quality for people who are wanting to downsize, but not necessarily downgrade their lifestyle. So it ended up working out pretty well and kind of built up a decent following from that and ended up filming a TV show on hgtv called Tiny Luxury, all around our family owned and operated tiny house manufacturing business. So did that for about 5 years, filmed about 4 seasons worth of episodes there. And then from there, we moved out of the actual building of tiny homes and took our information and knowledge and decided to put it into an educational platform because we saw there's a big lack in credible information and quality education for people who are looking to go tiny. So that's kind of a 30,000 foot view. We can dive into whatever parts deeper if you'd like.
Yeah, well, no, it's a really incredible story, and I'm a huge fan of. I sort of like fell in love with tiny houses through watching Tiny Luxury and sort of like being like an HGTV nerd. So I think it's really great that you were able to sort of go from building the custom high end builds to the TV show, and then sort of transitioning into tinyhouse.com. How long ago did the website? When did the website initially launch, and sort of like what sorts of things do you guys kind of offer?
Yeah, for sure. So the official educational side of the platform launched in 2020, actually right during COVID. We originally launched it as more of a conference website. So right when COVID hit, we were like, hey, everybody's locked down. Like, what are we gonna do? And we were just like, let's throw an online tiny house event. So that's what we did and put that together. We threw it together in about 5 weeks, which is pretty crazy. But it was really cool to see all the different experts come together and be willing to jump on and take a time slot and speak about whatever their area of expertise was in the tiny house space. And then we had a huge turnout. There's a ton of people who were super interested in it, which was awesome to see. And so that's kind of how we started the educational side of it. And we realized that we hit the nail right on the head, that there's a lot of people who are looking for that type of information. And so from there, it just kind of iterated and grew. And we're still doing our online conferences. but just a few of them a year type of thing, and then kind of try to focus more heavily on the ongoing educational side of things, which is anything and everything from digital resources to courses and so on. But yeah, that's kind of the path that we took from there. Yeah.
Okay. What was the conference format like? Like what's that side of it like if someone's interested in the conferences?
Yeah, depending on which conference, it's generally a 1 to 3 day event where we have experts from literally around the globe. We call it the Global Tiny House Conference. So it's
Cool.
literally people from all over the world, and we're bringing them all together. And they'll generally, give a either an hour or 30-minute long presentation, and they'll give a talk and kind of go through whatever area of expertise, whether it's tiny house design or tiny house insurance or building tiny homes, whatever it is, and then they'll open it up to like Q&A generally at the end, and so they're able to um, you know share their wealth of knowledge that they have throughout the years, and then people who have any questions, specific questions for their area of expertise, or just literally any questions, and we just cycle through speakers all day long, and so yeah, it's pretty fun. Just sit here at the computer, just literally binging tons and tons of tiny house expert content, so it's pretty fun.
That's awesome though, because I feel like one of the things that I know that people sort of struggle with, especially with like the industry becoming a little bit more mainstream than it maybe has been in the past few years, is just where do you go to find good information? Like how do you vet a builder? How do you make sure that you understand financing or insurance? Like, if you want to build a tiny house yourself, what are some of the best practices for doing that? And there's not really like a centralized place other than if you type something in Google where you're really going to be able to find that information. So I think that you're definitely meeting a need as more and more people sort of gravitate towards this industry as like, housing prices go up and things like that. So I think that that makes a lot of sense, and giving people a place to connect to, that's really helpful.
Yeah, appreciate that for sure. And that's definitely kind of a goal because we saw a lot of that when we were building tiny homes and selling tiny homes. We obviously are trying to educate people as best we can,
Hmm.
but also the other builders, sometimes we would hear false information that people are like, oh, well,
Hmm.
this builder told me this certain thing. And like, well, that's probably because they're trying to sell you something. And
Right.
so it's easy to kind of blur the lines of when you have something to gain from it. At the end of the day, it's a little bit easier to blur the lines. Obviously, there's quite a few builders with integrity out there, and
Hmm.
we highly support those builders and whatnot. But then there's also, you hear it that there's a few different builders here and there that are a little bit shady in how they kind of
Yep.
point people and whatnot. And so, yeah, just wanting to really kind of fill that spot of like unbiased education. That's also another reason why we love bringing experts from around the world, because
Hmm.
it's like we're not the gatekeepers of the information.
Right.
It's everybody can give their kind of their unique perspective on it and whatnot, and then it doesn't just look like it's the single source of truth. It's like if it's something that's opinion based, you can kind of get the different opinions, and then you can choose which one you want to go with, basically. Whereas if it's like factual based, then we try to make sure that anybody who's part of the speaker lineup, that they are kind of in tune with the things that are facts versus the false information. So
Mhm. No, that makes a lot of sense, and that kind of also speaks to the beauty of the movement because it is global,
mhm.
and you can pull from so many different resources. And I think that people's opinions and their experiences are really valid in this industry. Like, it's really important to be able to hear from a lot of different people, because there's a million different things you can do now when you want to go tiny. So I think that that's also a good opportunity for people to hear from people, in Canada or in Europe or in South America. Like, just get as much information as you can because then you can learn more and get more creative in your build.
Yeah, absolutely, for
Mhm.
sure.
Yeah. I know that one of the things that has sort of come up, at least for me, with some of the people that have watched the channel, is finances. So that's a big one. Like, I hear a lot of people, ask questions about like, well, like how do I pay for one? Like, is it, because I think for some people they're not sure if it's like you go the same route you would go for a traditional house, or something like that. So I was wondering if you could take a little bit of time and just talk about the financing process for tiny homes. Like, what does it look like? What does someone have to sort of like anticipate when considering how to pay for their tiny home?
Absolutely, yeah. That's one of the hot topics that's kind of been going on for literally the last 10 years with tiny
Mhm.
homes, and hopefully in the near future something will change for the better. But it's still kind of an little bit of an unknown, and you have to kind of take every situation and run it by what you're looking for, but then also try to find what will work for your specific application there. First off, I like to specify if you're looking for a tiny home that's on foundation, or like an ADU, or a cabin in the woods that's on a foundation, you're gonna have the ability to do more of the traditional mortgage route. So that's probably the way that you're going to want to go. That's going to probably be the best interest rates, the best terms, and it's gonna be so much easier. If you're gonna do a tiny house on wheels, that's where it gets definitely more tricky, because as you know, but as maybe not some of the listeners whatnot, there's not necessarily a specific certification for tiny homes on wheels yet, which kind of brings in the whole conversation of what are we certifying the tiny homes as? Like, what is a tiny home on wheels? And that's a big determining factor for a couple things. A, where you can legally put them, and then B, what banks can finance and what they can actually lend money on, knowing that their money is going to be secured, because banks aren't just going to lend money on anything. It has to be has to follow the rules. So if you're looking for a tiny home on wheels, knowing what certification is really important. If you're going to go with the more of the like park model, then that does open up some potential other maybe like mobile home, manufactured home type of financing there, which can be a little bit better terms. But most people who are doing it, some people are doing it now more the park model. But if you're going to do more of the RV, like the traditional tiny house on wheels, that's more the RV style, you can get RV financing, but there might be a few different hoops you got to jump through, and then also most specifically, you got to find a bank that's willing to lend on a tiny house, even though it's an RV. So you got to find a bank that's willing to lend on an RV. That just looks different than a traditional RV. So, and it's always kind of frustrating, because it's like a tiny house is built better. It's built to live in full time. And there's a few different things like that make a tiny house so much better than an RV. But the struggle is that, again, the banks have to follow their rules, and they can't just lend on anything. And if they're lending on RVs, it has to abide by the certain RV, standards and whatnot. And so there's kind of a few different ways you can do it. Bank financing, personal financing, or personal loan. And there's a few different struggles with those. Even if you are going to get an RV loan, one of the biggest things that we saw as a huge roadblock for so many people is that you have to have either a rent payment or a mortgage payment already. And then your new tiny house or new RV loan has to be able to fit on top of that and still be within your debt to income ratio. And that was a big killer for so many people. I mean, who here can, make, basically uh, two payments, and that's still within your debt to income ratio? That's not like a very common thing. And most people who are looking to go tiny is because they're wanting to readjust their finances, and they're wanting to make a better financial decision so they can get financially free in the future. And so that's the struggle there. The other thing is, even though tiny homes are more inexpensive than a traditional house most of the time, depending on where you live, um, they also are going to have worse terms, in a sense, where it's going to be like a maximum of a 15-year loan, but most likely it's going to be like a 10 or less year loan,
Okay.
which means that your payment is still going to be, $1,000+ a month, because it's only going to be it's going to pay off within 15 years. Whereas a traditional mortgage, generally, it's a 30-year loan where it slowly pays off over 30 years, which means that they can make the payments a lot smaller. Whereas if you're, trying to finance $150,000 or even $100,000 tiny house, but you're going to do it within 15 years, your payment's going to be pretty high there. So then all of that has to fit within your debt to income ratio. So financing is definitely one of the big struggles right now, as far as finding a bank that's willing to do it, and then being able to be actually approved for that loan, which is something that it's always a bummer to see people who are literally, it's the perfect path for them, a tiny house, the perfect path for them, but then they get shut down on something that's like, hey, well, you don't have enough debt to income ratio to have a rent payment and your tiny house payment, or whatever the situation is. So that's definitely a bummer. We are pretty excited that there's a couple different organizations working towards a actual standard for tiny homes, so it would have its own certification, its own standard. Once that happens, I think banks will be eager to jump on the opportunity to open up good financing for tiny homes. Um, so yeah, the straightforward answer is there's no like direct easy path as far as financing your tiny house right now, and you do have to get creative with which way you're going to go. And if you're doing it DIY, you have some other options as well, but you also lose some of the credibility. Like a bank loaning on an RV is most definitely most of the time going to want to make sure that it was done by a builder, and then they're going to want to make sure that it's on, like the NATA guides and some different specifications like that that shows that it's like a standard RV, because the banks are also really concerned about the resale value.
Oh,
That was
okay.
one of our big conversations that we always had with the banks when we were trying to get them to lend on it. They would be like, well, yeah, sure, they're financing an $80,000 tiny home, but if we had to repo this 1 year from now, what's it going to resell for? And they're like,
Mm-hmm.
we have no standards out there. We don't even know. Like, are we going to get 20,000 out of it, or can we
Mm-hmm.
get 100,000 out of it? The banks are just like, we have no clue. And so, not only is it not line up with a few of our guidelines, but we also don't know what the resale value is. So we're just going to stay away from it. That was one of the big concerns there, which brings up the aspect, kind of like I was saying, of if you go with a builder, and if the builder has a standard model type that they have built multiple of, there's sometimes a better chance that you can get financing. But it really depends on the bank, really depends on so much of the different specific application of how you're trying to achieve the tiny house loan. So
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, that's a long-winded way to say that there's no straightforward answer as far as financing right now, but you do have to get a little bit creative, and you have to identify which route you want to go. Are you wanting to go for the RV loan? Are you wanting to go for more of the park model loan? There's a really great bank called 21st, I think it's 21st Mortgage, or 21st Century is one of those, and they do like park model loans, but the builder has to be approved by that company, by that bank, in
Oh,
order
okay.
to get the lending on it. So, but they actually have pretty good loans. I think like 25-year loans that are,
Oh, wow.
which brings your payment way down,
Mm-hmm.
makes it way more financially affordable, and you don't have to be able to pay for two different payments. So you don't have to pay for rent and your tiny home. If you go
Mm-hmm.
through them, that tiny home, they consider it as your housing payment, basically. So
Okay.
yeah.
There's a lot. It's a lot to consider, but it can be done. So I think that
Yep.
that's like a really great. It's good to sort of like know the options that people can take, because I think that's the big thing
Yep.
that like people have brought up. It's just they have no idea where to start, or who to even like talk to. So I think that that's a
Yeah.
good summary of sort of like the challenges that they potentially could have, but also there are options there. They can go different routes, and I didn't know that it could potentially be easier if you go the ADU route, because that's a big one, especially down here in San Diego. A lot of the laws are shifting towards ADUs, so people are really sort of like jumping on the tiny house sort of like bandwagon, so to speak, because of the opportunity to put one in their backyard and use it as like short term rental. So that's something that is important for people to consider too.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big one. The only, I mean, it can be considered either downside or an upside,
Hmm.
is that you have to own the property at that
Right.
point. But
Yep.
sometimes it's actually easier to buy a traditional house that has a nice sized backyard. You can stick your tiny home on in the backyard. You can live in the
Hmm.
tiny home and rent the house out. Now this house pays your entire mortgage and everything, and then you don't have to worry about your monthly payment at all, or maybe it pays for majority of it, and you just
Yeah.
have a very small payment at that point. Plus it can be extended over the 30-year life of the loan, and so there's a lot of benefits to going on foundation. Obviously you lose some of the pros of being on wheels as well, but if you're on foundation, it does make things more black and white,
Hmm.
um, which is very helpful when you're trying to research and identify which path to take. If
Yeah.
it's black and white, you know exactly where you need to go and what you need to do. Whereas in tiny house on wheels, it can be really gray zone, and some banks will do certain things, some banks won't. And sometimes the banks that will do the certain thing, they'll just all of a sudden decide, we're not going to do it anymore.
Well.
Um,
Okay.
what we went through a lot when we were building and selling custom tiny homes, we'd work with a bank for like a year and a half, and we'd get multiple clients approved and sold and financed through this certain bank, and then all of a sudden they'd be like, we're not doing it anymore, we're
Mhm.
stepping away from any tiny house on wheels. and we're like, oh, you got to be kidding me. We have to go find a new bank to try to basically recultivate a new relationship, and go from there. So that was yeah, definitely one of the struggles is there's not necessarily like one size fits all right now for tiny
Hmm.
homes on wheels. But if you do also have some other potential options, like if you own a house, you can do like a HELOC, home
Oh,
equity
right, yeah.
line of credit, and pull out some money that way and buy your tiny home, or some different options like that. So there are
Hmm.
some cool, unique financing options, but it's definitely, yeah, like I said, not one size fits all. So
Yeah. Would you say that, like, I guess given your experience in the industry, having been in it since it started, would you say that financing is one of sort of like the biggest issues you see, sort of like challenges people will face as like the industry continues to move forward?
yeah, that definitely was probably the biggest showstopper for so many of our potential clients that wanted to come through. And what we see consistently
Hmm.
is people are just trying to figure out the financing aspect of it. The second most asked question would probably be like where they can park it.
Oh,
But
right,
that
yeah.
one we found is a lot easier to get around. Like if you have a tiny
Hmm.
home, like you can generally find a place to park it. And even if people are telling you to move it, you can find another place to park it and so on. And like there's enough gray area and enough kind of like leeway that you can, park it somewhere, and if you have to move it you can, or just park it somewhere and nobody ever says anything about it and you're totally fine. So the parking one is not as big of a deal. But obviously if you're going to buy property and park your tiny home on it, you don't want to buy property and then all of a sudden you have to move your tiny home off it, because then you're just holding bare property when
Right.
you got to move your tiny home. So you do want to make sure that you get that piece figured out if you're going to make a bigger commitment. But if you're just kind of finding a place to rent where you can park your tiny home, it's we basically found that people could always find a spot. Like they sometimes had to get a little bit scrappy with where they're going to be and maybe be
Yeah.
temporarily somewhere and move somewhere else and whatnot. But people always figured that aspect out of it. But the biggest one definitely was financing, because that's just a a struggle that there is no clear solution to, and
Hmm.
it's completely out of your hands most of the time. And the banks are and even now the banks are only getting more and more stringent. But like you said, it is completely possible and people do it. You just have to have a little bit of determination and
Yeah.
willpower and grit to push through when the goings get tough and you get told, no 50 times. You only need one of them to say yes. So
Right.
maybe that 51st one is the bank that says yes. So definitely worth pursuing the different options there and so on. Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah, persistence pays off, and just being patient. And I think the one of the things that I really like about the industry is that you can get creative, though. Like you don't, if you're going to buy a house, you really don't have too many options. You just have to go through, traditional mortgage lender. There's not a lot of great options in the housing industry for, first-time home buyers or people that are trying to buy houses on a budget. So I think that, at the end of the day, it's still a better option. Like it's more affordable than if you're going to go the traditional house sort of like buying route. So I think that that's really good for people too. What would you say to someone sort of like who's interested in going tiny, sort of like based on everything that you sort of have experienced, that they're interested in going tiny, but they have like no idea where to start? Like what advice would you give to them?
Yeah. I mean, I would definitely say dive into the education. Like you don't want to walk into this blindly. You want to make sure
Hmm.
that you know what you're getting yourself into. You want to make sure that you know what homeownership is all about, maintenance. It's not just renting and as soon as a problem happens you call the landlord and tell them, hey, fix this for me.
Right.
It's a lot more hands on. Like you got to be ready to either, pull out your checkbook and start writing checks to have people fix something, or you have to get hands on and actually fix it yourself. And then once you kind of get past that, then you have to also understand that there are some additional complicating factors for tiny homes on wheels, whether it's the trailer and making sure that your trailer setup is not going to rust and you're taking care of that. You want to make sure that if you have a good skirting around your tiny home, that you're taking care of that and you're not letting animals underneath there, and those types of things. So there's a bit of things to think about. um, and then really identifying like which route you're going to go. We see a lot of people who are like, I want to go tiny, but I don't know if I'm going to build it or if I'm going to have a builder and so on. But really just got to identify which route you're going to go. Once you've identified, you can start uh, learning as much as you can about that specific route. And if you can go with the builder, make sure you find a builder that is really credible, you can get some testimonials, and even we highly recommend like talking to some of their past customers. Like, how was their experience? Do they still like their tiny home? Was there any warranty issues? All that type of stuff. And if you're going to go DIY, you really got to start figuring out the basics of construction. Like, how does it
Mhm.
work? How does the whole framing structure come together? Like, how do the different systems come together, and making sure that you're identifying that. So education is going to save you so much time and so much pain and heartache down the road when you're actually going forward with your plan. So definitely, scour the internet, scour, YouTube. Our platform, tinyhouse.com, has so much educational information. There's so many different helpful people inside of the movement that are actually really eager to share their knowledge and their information. I mean, I've proof for that because we have literally hundreds of hours of expert speakers on all of our conferences, of people just literally sharing just so much gold nuggets of information. So people are really eager to share their information. You just kind of have to get in with the right crowd to start asking them the questions and so on. And then also I'd say, which is something I got from Alexis and Christian over at the Tiny House Expedition, but they say when you start doing your tiny house project, just get chatty with it. Just start talking to
Mhm.
people about it, and they'll be like, oh, this person knows this person who has a perfect spot that you might be able to build your tiny home there, and either do it for free or maybe pay a very small fee every single month to like park your tiny home and actually build it there. And or like, hey, this person might have the perfect spot for you to park it once you built your tiny home or you bought your tiny home, or whatever it is, or maybe somebody's willing to finance you from just chatting about it or whatever. So be willing to just kind of talk about your project. People think that tiny homes are really interesting, and use that to your advantage. So
Mhm.
definitely start kind of just diving in, and also know that it's going to be up to you. Like, you're the sole and responsibility owner of the whole project, so nobody else is going to care about it as much as you. Nobody's going to care
Yeah.
about the budget. Nobody's going to care about the in quality and project than you are. So you really have to know what you want, and work hard to achieve that. So it's not going to be easy, but it's going to be, the result is going to be literally life changing for so many people. So it's definitely worth it if that's the route that you want to go.
Yeah, no, I think that's really great advice, especially since everyone's so friendly and like really like just willing to help. I think that's what I've learned. I'm always just saying that. I feel like I say that in every video, but like I really do feel like this community is really different than other industries where, people are willing to talk to you, have conversations, offer advice, resources, lend a hand. So it really is worth it to sort of step outside your comfort zone and just say, "Hey, like I don't know how to do this. I don't understand what to do. Like, can you chat with me for like 15 minutes? Like, I'll buy you a coffee. Can we talk about, DIY tiny house, like that sort of thing?" And I feel like it's definitely going to feel uncomfortable at first. But I found that everyone's like super, super friendly and nice. And, everybody wants everyone to do well and grow. And it's just fun. It's fun to talk about it. It's fun to talk about tiny houses. So I don't think you're going to find anyone that's going to be like, oh, no, I don't want to talk about it. Cause everyone I've talked to so far just loves chatting about it. So
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. That's
yeah.
awesome.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. I know that anyone watching this video is going to find it super helpful. Again, I think it's great that what y'all are doing, and there'll be like a link to your website in the video description, to your Instagram, so they can reach out to you, ask questions, and yeah, I'm happy to have you back on the channel in the future too. And it was good to just sit down and be able to chat about tiny houses and finances. So I appreciate it, Zach.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks so much for taking the time to chat, asking some great questions, and really championing the cause of helping educate other people inside of the industry and help them achieve their tiny house dreams. So, thanks for the time and everything.
Yeah. All right. Cool. We'll talk soon. All right, so that was my conversation with Zach. I appreciate Zach taking the time to talk to us about everything, their backstory, sort of like what inspired them to create tinyhouse.com, and they're definitely doing exactly that. They're creating a resource, being like a wealth of knowledge for people to learn everything about tiny houses. So please do take the time to talk to them. Check out their website, check out their Instagram. Links to everything they're doing are in the video description here. Make sure you ask questions. Don't be afraid to ask questions. As Zach said, I'm just going to reiterate, it's going to save you a lot of time, it's going to save you a lot of money, and you might make a new friend, new resource resource in this ever-growing, ever-changing community that is the tiny house community. So yeah, thank you so much, Zach. And then also, if you are in the shopping stage and you sort of like have an idea of what you want to do for your tiny house, but you're doing like the builder sort of like shopping stage, that sort of thing, please do check out Mac Insurance. Make sure that you check out their website, links to what they're doing, their website, their Instagram are in this video description too, so that you can get insured. So thank you again for sponsoring this video, Mac Insurance. And then yeah, if you're new to the channel, please take time to subscribe, tap the notification bell so you find out when I drop new videos. I drop new videos every single week, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you guys. Anything you want to see in the comments, I'd love to hear from you guys. Ask questions, reach out, send me an email, and don't forget to think tiny. I'll see you guys in the next one.